Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. So a few weeks ago, Deacon Steve approached me and asked me to share a little bit about my work with you. Maybe because we're both gardeners of sorts. Anyway, I'm privileged to work for a land conservancy in Orange County, the Irvine Ranch Conservancy, and I manage habitat restoration efforts there. So here's a view of my office. It is a place of biologic and geologic splendor. And I'm reminded every day of how privileged all of us are to live in one of the world's great hotspots of biodiversity. Now, the Irvine Ranch originally covered 100,000 acres, and it stretched all the way from the Pacific Ocean near Laguna Beach up into the mountains of the Santa Anas. And some of you may only know it as the place where the 405 and the 5 freeways come together. But back in the 70s, the Irvine Company took the lands in the valley and converted the avocado groves and orange orchards into shopping centers and subdivisions. But the hillier land to the north and to the south, they set aside as permanent protected open space for all time, protected by multiple layers of conservation easements. The Irvine Company also gave the startup funds for the Irvine Ranch Conservancy. Our mission was to help manage these lands in cooperation with the landowners, which are now Orange County Parks, City of Irvine. But now we're a completely independent entity, 501c3 public nonprofit. So these 40,000 some acres of open space lands that we manage, they're a patchwork of various habitats. There are bunch grass prairies, there's scrub habitats, oak woodland habitats, and streamside or riparian habitats as well. But the real glory of these lands becomes evident during the spring wildflower season, when there are extensive displays of California poppies and lupins, popcorn flower, all common native species, and rare species like the chocolate lilies and Mariposa lilies. It's just magnificent to be out there at that time. We have an array of what we call camera traps, and that's how we monitor the goings on of wildlife on these open space lands. And we have a healthy population of carnivores. The mountain lions roam large distances and are frequently present, though rarely seen on the lands that we manage. There are coyotes, bobcats. There's one on the right with a ground squirrel in its mouth. Gray foxes. They are all present. The bird life diversity is remarkable. This little gray and black bird in the middle is the famous California gnatcatcher, and that is a species that perhaps had the misfortune to choose as its habitat lowland areas of Southern California. So there's not much habitat left for it anymore, but it does have a strong presence on the Irvine Ranch open space lands, and it is a protected, it's a federally listed species under the Endangered Species Act. And so it has driven much of the habitat protection efforts in Southern California in the last 40 years. And those protections have also benefited a wide array of other species, the hawks and loggerhead shrikes, and the cactus wren. That's another endangered species that is present on our lands. Reptiles are there, things like the spadefoot toads in the vernal pools, various snakes and lizards, and some really fearsome examples of rattlesnakes. You don't go out into these lands during the spring months without snake chaps on. but that is an awe-inspiring experience to encounter one of them too. Now, everybody's favorite reptile is the heavily armed but extremely docile horned lizard. And these little guys just never fail to elicit smiles from anyone who encounters them. It's a great example of what E.O. Wilson called biophilia, just the connection you have with these little creatures. Also a species of special concern. The humble arthropods, things like tarantulas and scorpions, also the monarch butterflies here in the middle, one feeding on its host plant, a milkweed and a monarch butterfly. These are the original long distance migrants between Mexico and the United States. Here's a bee pollinating a cobweb thistle, and these pollinators provide tremendous and totally free services to us humans by ensuring our food supply. Now, along with these lovely and beautiful lands, we also have a lot of what we call degraded lands. These are areas that in the past were perhaps overgrazed and then subjected to repeated wildfires, and then invasions of non-native plant species. And the wildfires and invasions of non-natives sort of go hand in hand. It seems that the more a place burns, the more the non-native species take over, and the more the non-native species are present, the more the site burns. So it's sort of an endless cycle. But these forlorn and all too common landscapes are comprised of non-native species, mostly grasses and herbs from the Mediterranean region, and they just take up space and offer little in the way of habitat value. They also have a competitive edge over the native species because they lack the complex ecological relationships with wildlife that the native plants do. So basically, that's a fancy way of saying nothing eats this stuff. It just takes up space. So our biggest challenge is a plant called mustard, black mustard to be exact. And this is actually believed to be the very same species that so impressed Jesus that he told a parable about it. According to St. Luke's, Jesus said, "The kingdom of God is like mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his garden. It grew and became a large shrub, and the birds of the air nested in its branches." Now, like Jesus, I have been impressed with this plant that grows from nothing into a small tree in the course of a few months. In contrast to the gardener in the parable, though, our job is to remove this plant from the garden so that the birds of the air can find a place to nest. Like a garden, these lands on the urban wildland interface no longer take care of themselves. They paradoxically have to be managed to maintain their wildness. A prime example of that is our water trough system. These are leftovers from the old ranch days, but in centuries past, the wildlife could roam far and wide during the drought season and find water, and now they are much more confined. So in order for them to persist, we have volunteers going out to these troughs as needed during the drought seasons and filling them with water so that the wildlife can drink and live. Here's a couple of impressive mountain lions on the right, slaking their thirst in a trough. Here on the left, there's a mule deer at night drinking from the trough, and the troughs just attract a whole host of wildlife that really depend on those. So another way we have to manage lands, like we didn't in the past, is through our fire watch program. We have teams of dedicated volunteers that during red flag conditions, when the Santa Ana winds are blowing, they deploy out to strategic overlook points where they can watch and scan the horizon all day long, usually in 3-hour shifts, to make sure there's to guard against any signs of fire, smoke. And so that's important service to keep these lands wild. Now, Another form of intervention to keep wildlands wild is habitat restoration. And I want to talk with you about a 10-year project that I've been working on in a place called B-Flat Canyon. It's a 300-acre sub-watershed of the Santa Ana River near Santiago Canyon. And we've been working there for 10 years. In the heavily degraded areas, we've done intensive restoration. In the less degraded areas, we've tried to facilitate natural regeneration of native vegetation. And you can't just go in and start restoring land. You have to have a plan, and it takes quite a while to develop. There's permits that you have to secure. There are biological surveys that need to be conducted. There is a lot of considerations of the subtleties of the landscape, the soil characteristics, the land use history that a site has been through, and looking at patches of remnant native vegetation. Those are all clues that can help us figure out what was the site, what does it want to be, what should we do here. So that all goes into the planning process. And then once the plan is complete and approved, then we move into actually implementing it. And that's where it gets fun. There's it sort of goes in 3 different phases. Site preparation goes first. We go in and we strip out the non-native weeds, remove the dead standing thatch material, and keep the weeds from growing up. And that's a long-term commitment, because the soils have such an accumulation of weed seeds that it takes often years to really fully deplete the weed seeds. And on level ground, we'll use agricultural implements up here on the left-hand side to mow. On more steeply sloping areas and rugged remote terrain, we sometimes bring in herds of goats. Here's some on the right, some goats being offloaded from a trailer, and they'll live out here for several weeks and be rotated through from one enclosure to another, cleaning out all the weeds. They are surrounded by a solar-powered electric fence, and that's to keep them on target, make sure they don't stray into any sensitive area and cause any damage, because they are fairly indiscriminate, and also to protect them from mountain lions. They're very interested in them. They also have a couple guard dogs living with them. They think they're part of the herd, and they keep the goats safe as well. So a multi-year process, but eventually when the sites are ready, we go in and seed and plant these areas. In some places, we'll use a drill seeder, like here in the center photograph, to install a diverse mix of shrubs and wildflowers and grasses, depending on the target habitat that we're trying to create in a particular spot. In steeply sloping areas, the crews will go out and broadcast seed and rake it into the soil manually. In some cases, there are species that only establish well from container plants, and so we'll install some of those as well. This fellow here on the left is Guillermo. He's been one of our seasonal field crews for years now, very dedicated. His son is now works with us as a foreman for our restoration efforts full-time. And down here on the bottom left, there's the crew planting cactus pads. So a lot of work that goes on in that. It's typically during the implementation phase, an intense 1-year period of seeding and planting. So you might wonder, where do we get that seed? You can't go to Home Depot and buy it. It starts out with wild collections. Our people go out into the existing wildlands, and they will sustainably harvest a portion of the seed that native plants produce. But in order to get the materials, the volume of material that we need, we have a native seed farm, a 7-acre farm in Irvine, where we grow out the plants. And it is, the volunteers are just indispensable in operating this little farm. They are involved in planting those seeds, in tending the plants, and then in the fall or late spring, harvesting the seed material and processing it and turning it into seed mixes that we can then take out onto the lands that we're going to restore. And we have over 50 different species of native plants that we grow on these lands. And that's because we strongly believe that diversity is one of the keys to creating a resilient habitat that can withstand the changes in climate that are coming upon us. And then we also believe that in diversity, because it's so important to have things blooming, different species blooming at different times of the year to ensure that the pollinators have the resources that they need. We use volunteers in other ways. Some volunteers help us collect acorns. They're on the right. On the top, they're planting an oak grove with tree tube protectors. Here in the middle, people are planting cactus and obviously, evidently enjoying themselves. It's tricky work. Some volunteers sweep through these remote back canyons and do selective removal of particularly nasty non-natives like tree tobacco, and they have a lot of fun in the process. And I think a lot of people have the experience of working to heal the land also in some ways heals ourselves. So even though these lands are primarily a nature preserve with recreation as a distant secondary goal, we know that the community has to be part of the picture, if for no other reason that there cannot really be any long-term constituency to support protection of these lands unless people know these lands and love them. So we welcome volunteers to come out and get to know these lands and to work. And we have a lot of docent-led activities, mostly volunteer planned and hosted, where people can come out and enjoy the lands, various activities like hiking, bird watching, mountain bike riding, horseback riding, yoga classes. It's really pretty impressive. It's now somewhat dwindled due to COVID-19, but it will be back, and it's really pretty impressive, the diversity of offerings. So, and then for those who like less structure, every now and then we'll sponsor an occasional open access day where people can come in and wander the trails and enjoy the lands, but definitely not love them to death. Now, the third phase, and the one that lasts the longest, is maintenance. We will have the native plants come up and start growing, as you see there on the right, but they still need a lot of tending for several years. The crews down here on the left, they're removing mustard and other broadleaf weeds. In the middle, they're mowing annual grasses to keep them in check. On the top, there's crews doing some supplemental seeding because there's maybe some spots where the natives didn't come up. One of the constraints we work with is that there's no irrigation out here on these lands. So all the activities have to be carefully timed in accordance with the rains. And sometimes the rains don't arrive, and sometimes the plantings fail. But you know, I've been really impressed with these native plants. If you just give them some room, they will germinate and grow with the smallest amount of rain, and they'll hang on. They're definitely tough. But anyway, over the years, as we continue to maintain these sites, the non-native weeds relinquish their hold. And on the upper left there, you can see one of our seasonal crew, Valeriano, standing in a mix of lupins and phacelias and poppies. And it's neat to see the non-natives relinquish their hold, and we begin to see something that really resembles a native habitat. So now I want to show you some photographs, some before and after photographs from B flat. Here on the left, there's a picture of a burned out hillside that really got hammered in the 2007 fires and was not recovering very well at all. And after 8-10 years of work, it's now a pretty nice example of a chaparral habitat with lots of scattered large shrubs like toyon and laurel sumac and a pretty diverse understory. Here's a hillside that in 2012 on the left was nothing but non-native grass and dried up mustard. And now it's a mix of California bush sunflower and black sage and California sagebrush and various wildflowers. It's a real joy to behold. Here's an old stockyard that was heavily damaged. Soil was super compacted. We had to go in and rip the soil to basically break up the clods. But now it's transitioning into an oak savanna. It's a long process, but I think we've set it on the road by planting these oak groves with scattered bunch grasses and wildflowers, and believe it will sustain itself at this point. And then this picture on the right is a bunch grass prairie restoration that we did on a mesa at the top of B Flat Canyon. And this flat expanse, it actually gave the name B Flat to the whole canyon. And it's neat to be out there in the spring when the annual wildflowers are blooming, because that is when this site really lives up to its name, and the pollinators are just buzzing, swarming all over the place. So it's neat seeing that happen. So with that, I wanted to thank you for your interest, and happy to talk with you about the project or anything else you want to chat about. Thanks. I'm going to stop sharing now.
And you've already got one logical question of, are there any open access days coming up?
Good question. We've got a website, letsgooutside.org, and you can see what the open access days are. I think they have an open access day every month, and it rotates around from one place to another. This is in a preserve called Limestone Canyon, and the trails are open for hiking maybe once every couple months, and it's a neat experience. There's other preserves. There's Bomber Canyon, there's Black Star Canyon, there's just a whole host of open space lands, and yeah. So I definitely, I don't know off the top of my head, but.
So, questions from the screen. John. John O'Shea.
Yes, Robert. Thank you so much for the presentation. Just curious, are you seeing any impacts from the effects of climate change or anything on your work and the restoration work?
Yeah, no doubt it's happening now. I have a nearby project where I'm doing oak woodland restoration, and I'm just finding the oaks are really getting hammered in the summer months. The mature oaks are fine, but my little oak seedlings that I planted just I'm starting to wonder if they're still viable anymore. But anyway, we're trying different things to try to get more oak regeneration going. I think that's one species that may be affected in the future. Definitely with climate change, things are going to change out there. And we're just hoping that with our restorations, with trying to add as much diversity to the site, that they'll be resilient.
Robert, what is the website?
It's Let's Go Outside, one word, all run together, letsgooutside.org. I'll add that to the chat.
Okay. Thank you, Robert.
Sure.
And Amberdette, you had a question? You're muted.
Now am I unmuted? Am I unmuted?
Yay.
Okay, good.
You are.
It says I am and I'm not. Hi, Robert. Thank you so much. I just want to be there right now. I saw some workers. Do you have paid folks other than volunteers?
Definitely, yeah. The volunteers have been great at the farm and then at various other activities. But yeah, we have a full-time crew of maybe about 8 people, and then during the spring season, which is basically January through June, we have the workload is pretty intense. So we have seasonal crew members, and a lot of them come back year after year to work with us.
Do they apply through the Conservancy or through, how do they apply?
A lot of them Most of them have been returning year after year, so we haven't had to advertise or anything. It's just yeah. Though I mean, if we have full-time positions, we post those on our website as career options.
Thanks.
Other questions? I think we all just want to go sit in the midst of the wildflowers. Just
It's definitely wonderful. Yeah, but even this time of year, they say that California doesn't have seasons, but it's not true. If you go out there, there's all sorts of subtleties to the vegetation that once you become accustomed to it, you realize, okay, it's fall when the buckwheat is turning brown and the golden bush is in flower. It's great any time of year.
What a great place to work.
It is. I love going to work every day. It's a great privilege. So I'm happy to share a little bit of that experience with all of you.
I do have one more question. Are you a docent as well, or are you just too busy working?
It's no, the docents are all volunteers, and it's amazing. They go through intensive training, and then once they complete it, they are free to plan activities themselves and take the initiative, and they become very creative with new activities to enrich and enhance the experience of people and educate people. So it's really taken on a life of its own. I mean, we have community outreach staff, but really they support the volunteers to do much of the community outreach.
Do you have the same problems with the wild animals, particularly the lions that we have in the Santa Monica Mountains? You know, they're being killed when they try to cross freeways and things like that.
Yeah, I don't know that we've had any kills recently, but yeah, there is a lot of concern as to how viable they're going to be long term. We've got a larger, healthier population than in the Santa Monica Mountains, but there's issues with inbreeding, and one of the most insidious things is the use of rat poison. I mean, people put that in their homes to kill rats, but then the rats go out and die, and they're gobbled up by other animals that get gobbled up by other animals, and so this poison just kind of cascades through the ecosystem. So many of the mountain lions, I know in the Santa Monica Mountains, have been affected by the rat poisons. So that's a very serious problem. We have underpasses under the highways. The 91 freeway has a couple wildlife underpasses, so the mountain lions and other animals can move from the lands that we manage into the Chino Hills and Puente Hills. So we're very big on creating corridors where wildlife can still roam and access much of their old territories.
They've been debating an animal overpass over the 405 for years, and I don't know if it'll ever happen.
Yeah, the South Ranch is a little tougher to manage because it's a little more isolated, but we would love to see some way to connect the South Ranch lands with the North Ranch lands. And there's the Aguashanon Wash is a potential corridor that could, with some retrofitting, maybe bring some connection back between the North and the South lands.
So we maybe have time for one more question, but if there aren't any questions.
I don't know if this was asked already, but I did see Mike ask the question of how can you volunteer?
Yeah. Let me see. That's you would go to our website, which is letsgooutside.org. I will post that right now, and letsgooutside.org to.
Actually, it's already in the chat. Here it is.
John
Okay,
John McCaleb is helping you there.
Okay, thanks.
You've got your assistant. That's what it is, being in community, that other people put up the answers
Yes,
in the
I
chat.
appreciate
It's
that. in being able to accommodate volunteers just because of the COVID situation. But I think as soon as Orange County can move into a Tier 2 status, they'll be able to ramp up their volunteer work again.
Well, Robert, just know both our great gratitude for the work you personally do. Like, all of us think about this work of partnering with God in creation, but you've made a life of it. And
glorious.
Thank you for that commitment and that vocation, because I think sometimes we think only clergy have vocations, but you clearly have found your vocation, and your service to God in creation is awesome. And we do like that on your bio at the Irvine Ranch Conservancy, we get credit to the shower program. That's
oh yes,
quite awesome,
yes, I saw how
too.
you worked that in. That's great.
You did work that in. I was like, well, that's cool. But also thank you for just bringing that part of you and your life and your expertise and sort of the wonder of what you do back for all of us to learn, to enjoy, and to expand our world. So thank you, thank you, thank you for saying yes when Steve said, would you do this for us?
I'm honored, truly.
So our Zoom claps, right? But thank you so much. And all of you who stayed, thank you. And we will close ourselves down and continue on to Spanish worship.
Okay, bye everybody.